banking system really work? Let's mine deep. For starters, the vast majority of banks do not come from the public sector. They're actually privately owned. The largest banking institutions in the United States, such as JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citibank, known as the Big Four, purchase treasuries issued by the US government in order to create the dollars in your checking account. But what about central banks? The Federal Reserve System is not owned by anyone. The Federal Reserve derives its authority from the Congress, which created the system in 1913 with the enactment of the Federal Reserve Act, consisting of a blend of public and private characteristics according to the Fed's website. The board is appointed by the president and later confirmed by the Senate, with the responsibility to guide the Federal Reserve System and oversee the 12 reserve banks. The board is held directly accountable to the Congress, but unlike many other public agencies, it is not funded by the Congress. The Fed and the U.S. Treasury work tightly with the private sector in order to keep the U.S. dollar system operational. Anyway, imagine if I told you that the modern financial system operates on what some call an infinite money glitch. This glitch is due to fractional reserve banking, where banks only keep a fraction of deposited money on reserves and lend out the rest. So you mean to tell me that banks are actually lending out our money to random people? Yeah, let me explain. There's actually a rule called the marginal reserve requirement that says banks must keep 10% of the money that people have deposited in their checking and savings accounts. Here's how it works. Let's say you deposit $1,000. The bank only keeps $100, which is 10% as reserves, then loans out the remaining $900. So the person who borrowed $900 then spends it, and the recipient deposits it back into the bank. The bank keeps $90, which is the 10%, and loans out $810. This cycle repeats, creating new money each time. In this example, $1,000 turns into $10,000 in the economy. This infinite money glitch is actually known as the monetary multiplier effect, and is made possible because banks are allowed to lend more money than they actually have in reserves. This system has risks. If too many people want to withdraw their money simultaneously in what is referred to as a bank run, the bank may not have enough reserves, causing a collapse. In just 2023 alone, 5 banks have already failed.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank.
The second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
Meanwhile, Signature Bank marks the 3rd largest bank failure in U.S. history.
We're back with some breaking news this morning. First Republic Bank has been taken over by federal regulators and sold to JP Morgan Chase.
While fractional reserve banking is the norm in modern economies, it can be vulnerable to fraud or irresponsible lending, as seen as China's real estate loan issues. Stress tests by central banks aim to ensure banks can handle unexpected situations and avoid a catastrophe due to infinite money glitch. So why should you care? Because you've been lied to. Banks don't care about you. They're designed to keep the rich rich and the poor poorer. They actually make a business out of the poor people. Why do you think overdraft fees exist? So is your money really that safe in the bank? Is it even really your money? Luckily, Bitcoin fixes this. In a complete change from the status quo, self-custody of your Bitcoin is actually possible, with no ability for a financial institution to rehypothecate your funds. Remember, not your keys, not your coins. Don't miss Freddie new Backstage. How does Bitcoin keep the government from tracking you?
It's an interesting question because obviously every transaction you make on the base layer is public. So if the government can associate a public address with you as an individual, they can track you. But at the same time, if you transact properly with Bitcoin, you're not using the normal financial rails, and therefore if the government is not able to associate that address with you, then you can transact freely without them being able to understand what you're doing or know what you're spending your money on. So I'd say that's a bit of a double-edged sword. There's a privacy element to using Bitcoin properly, and there's also the idea that even if they knew what you were doing with your money, they probably can't stop you.
Speaking of stopping you, that's what CBDCs are doing. Like, eventually they will stop you from purchasing some stuff, no?
Well, that's what they think, but I'd like to say that they will fail.
Yeah.
Everywhere they've been tried so far, they've failed. And the important thing for us to understand is that, yes, a CBDC may have permissions built into it such that you will not be allowed to spend your money in certain places at certain times on certain things. But if you have some Bitcoin, you don't need to care about that. You can go on spending freely on whatever you want to spend your money on without restriction. If you broadcast a valid transaction to the network signed with your private key, that's going to go through, provided you don't get into a fee block, and then you just may need to wait a bit of time.
So how does Bitcoin's decentralized nature contribute to user privacy compared to traditional banking systems?
Okay, well, the traditional banking system, your bank account with Barclays or Lloyds, HSBC, essentially you should consider that every single transaction you make with your bank card is tracked and is followed, and that's the system that we actually all do live with anyway. However, with Bitcoin, you can perform certain different mechanisms in order to preserve your privacy. You can use the Lightning Network, you can use whirlpools. You can use self-custodial solutions. You can make sure you never reuse addresses. You just make it that bit harder for people to track you, even if as I said earlier, it is trackable if it's on the base layer.
And one thing that I've noticed is the government latches onto convenience. They make it convenient for you. They're like, if you use this, it's more convenient. It saves time. You have the TSA, the pre-check. Then you have the global entry that they're tracking you, marketing it as it helps you save time. But in the end, they're utilizing like biometric data to track you.
Yeah, there's a bit of a trade-off there between how much convenience you want to trade for loss of privacy. And that is actually a transaction that all of us make almost every day, isn't it? We've seen that via QR entries during the pandemic. Do you want to enter this building? Well, you have to have ticked certain boxes and you have to have a QR on your phone. And unfortunately, international travel is a very obvious example of something where you do have to release some of your personal privacy. But I think I'd return to the Cypherpunk Manifesto. Privacy is the ability to reveal yourself selectively to the world. You may choose to reveal yourself selectively via getting a passport so that you can travel to different countries. You shouldn't be forced to reveal everything about yourself. It should remain a choice with you. If you don't want to travel outside the borders of your country, you don't get a passport. You shouldn't be forced to.
Like having the option to reject that. And that's something that I feel like the government is leaning towards obligating us to do,
Well, absolutely.
So are there potential risks and downsides of using Bitcoin for privacy?
Well, I think I'd come back to what we said originally, that everything you do on the blockchain is public. But that's actually, in my view, a good means of pushing back against people who say Bitcoin is for criminals. If you use Bitcoin and you're a criminal, you're an idiot. Well, everything you do is public forever and you can't change it. If an address association is made between you, the criminal, and that address, that evidence is there on the blockchain and it's admissible in court. So only stupid criminals use Bitcoin.